Oh, we're live. Salam, everyone. Maybe we can wait a few minutes to get started. Ramadan Mubarak. Brother Abdullah Salam in the chat. Welcome. Ramadan Mubarak, Allah.
وإياك.
Can you? Did you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
I said Ramadan Mubarak.
I said وإياك.
Thank you so much. Maybe we can go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody, to our second Dua and Chill for this Ramadan. We're really, really excited and grateful to have you, alhamdulillah, and excited to not only have all of these incredible guests today, but also continuously be raising funds. So that link will always be available for you. So if you ever feel a moment of inspiration, alhamdulillah, please consider using that moment to also then donate to help us free believers from incarceration and join us as we are part of a larger movement to abolish all prisons and policing. So first we have, I see Issa's here. Bismillah in the chat. Bismillah. Let's get started. Allah is joining us today. Thank you so much to recite some Qur'an. The bio that I have for you is that you're a good dude. So can confirm. Also does great work with us here at BBO. So thank you so much for reciting some Qur'an whenever you're ready.
All right. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. إن الذين لا يرجون لقاءنا ورضوا بالحياة الدنيا واطمأنوا بها والذين هم عن آياتنا غافلون أولئك مأواهم النار بما كانوا يكسبون إن الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات يهديهم ربهم بإيمانهم تجري من تحتهم الأنهار في جنات النعيم دعواهم فيها سبحانك اللهم وتحيتهم فيها سلام وآخر دعواهم أن الحمد لله رب العالمين ولو يعجل الله للناس الشر استعجالهم بالخير لقضي إليهم أجلهم فنذر الذين لا يرجون لقاءنا في طغيانهم يعمهون وإذا مس الإنسان الضر دعانا لجنبه أو قاعدا أو قائما فلما كشفنا عنه ضره مر كأن لم يدعنا إلى ضر مسه كذلك زين للمسرفين ما كانوا يعملون ولقد أهلكنا القرون من قبلكم لما ظلموا وجاءتهم رسلهم بالبينات وما كانوا ليؤمنوا كذلك نجزي القوم المجرمين ثم جعلناكم خلائف في الأرض من بعدهم لننظر كيف تعملون وإذا تتلى عليهم آياتنا بينات قال الذين لا يرجون لقاء نأتي بقرآن غير هذا أو بدله قل ما يكون لي أن أبدله من تلقاء نفسي إن أتبع إلا ما يوحى إلي إني أخاف إن عصيت ربي عذاب يوم عظيم قل لو شاء الله ما تلوته عليكم ولا أدراكم به فقد لبثت فيكم عمرا من قبله أفلا تعقلون فمن أظلم ممن افترى على الله كذبا أو كذب بآياته إنه لا يفلح المجرمون ويعبدون من دون الله ما لا يضرهم ولا ينفعهم ويقولون هؤلاء شفعاؤنا عند الله قل أتنبئون الله بما لا يعلم في السماوات ولا في الأرض سبحانه وتعالى عما يشركون وما كان الناس إلا أمة واحدة فاختلفوا ولولا كلمة سبقت من ربك لقضي بينهم فيما فيه يختلفون ويقولون لولا أنزل عليه آية من ربه فقل إنما الغيب لله فانتظروا إني معكم من المنتظرين صدق الله العظيم. I'll read the English translation inshallah. Those who do not expect to meet us and are pleased with the life of this world, contenting themselves with it and paying no heed to our signs, shall have the fire for their home because of what they have used to do. But as for those who believe and do good deeds, their Lord will guide them because of their faith. Streams will flow at their feet in the gardens of bliss. Their prayer in them will be, "Glory to you, God," their greeting, "Peace," and the last part of their prayer, "Praise be to God, Lord of the worlds." If God were to hasten on for people the harm they have earned, as they wish to hasten on the good, their time would already be up. But we leave those who do not expect to meet us to wander blindly in their excesses. When trouble befalls man, he cries out to us, whether lying on his side, sitting, or standing. But as soon as we relieve him of his trouble, he goes on his way, as if he had never cried out to us to remove his trouble. In this way, the deeds of such heedless people are made attractive to them. Before you people, we destroy whole generations. When they did evil, their messengers brought them clear signs, but they refused to believe. This is how we repay the guilty. Later we made you their successors in the land to see how you would behave. When our clear revelations are recited to them, those who do not expect to meet with us say, "Bring us a different Qur'an, or change it, O Prophet." Say, "It is not for me to change it of my own accord. I only follow what is revealed to me, for I fear the torment of an awesome day if I were to disobey my Lord." Say, "If God had so willed, I would not have recited it to you, nor would he have made it known to you. I lived a whole lifetime among you before it came to me. How can you not use your reason?" Who could be more wicked than someone who invents lies against God or denies his revelations? The guilty will never prosper. They worship alongside God things that can neither harm nor benefit them, and say, "These are our intercessors with God." Say, "Do you think you can tell God about something he knows not to exist in the heavens or the earth? Glory be to him. He is far above the partner gods they associate with him." All people were originally one single community, but later they differed. If it had not been for a word from your Lord, the preordained judgment would already have been passed between them regarding their differences. They say, "Why has no miraculous sign been sent down to him from his Lord?" Say, Prophet, "Only God knows the unseen, so wait, I too am waiting." Sadaqallahu al-Azim.
Thank you so much. That was so beautiful, Alajan. Appreciate you as always. And we are super excited to transition on to the next part of tonight's program and introducing these two gorgeous, gorgeous girls. We have Sadia Bashir and Camila Pickett. Sadia Bashir is an award-winning poet whose work has been commissioned by Penny Appeal USA, Apple, and The Guardian. She has also been interviewed on media outlets such as Al Jazeera and The Washington Post, and she's currently studying psychology and fashion design at Marymount University, while also working on her first full-length poetry manuscript, mashallah. And Sadia can be found on all social medias at Ida B. Wellen, which we can drop in the comments. And then we also have the lovely Camila Pickett, who is a writer, artist, abolitionist, and co-creator of Flowers, a digital and literary collaboration that examines culture, religion, activism, joy, and liberation through a Black Muslim lens. It is a love letter to Black people from Black Muslim women, specifically Camila and co-creator Rashida James Sadia. You can follow their work on Instagram at Flowers Podcast, Voyages Journal, which is voyagesjournal.com, and wherever you listen to podcasts. So thank you both so much for joining us tonight. Really, really excited to have you. And we can start super quickly. I know both Sadia and Camila have some beautiful writing and poetry to share, so I'll let them kick this off.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Ramadan Mubarak. So glad to be here. The poem that I'm reading tonight is called The Muezzin Sings the Blues. What a frightening way to say Bismillah, with a daggered America softly on your tongue. A heathen harakat. The descendants of Hoover know the steps to make ablution. They wash my sister's blood off before they join the congregation. Laying the smartphone down to ask, where is East? The arrow lurches from one side to the next like the door of my cousin's cell. Hear the clang ring like the call to prayer. As Allah gave Islam to the eye of the desert, so he gave Islam to Rahway prison, a mass incarceration madhab. The informants are in our masjid, asking us to bear names. This is not what my aunt meant when she named her son slave of the all-seeing. We have been stretching smoke since they turn our antecedents into incense. Thank you.
Wow. When I first read this poem, my jaw was dropped. And again, I'm like, whew. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm really excited to dive into that more as well in a minute. And I know Camila also is sharing some preview writing from an upcoming project that we're all very excited to listen to.
I don't know how I'm supposed to follow that.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what I'm supposed to say. Like, blah, blah, blah. Assalamu alaikum. Ramadan Mubarak. I do not have anything like that to share, but I am excited to be in conversation. What I wanted to talk about today was something that Rashida and I presented at a Muslim Futures conference back in January. We wrote a piece in response to the question the conference was asking about what Muslim futures could possibly look like, and to kind of expand upon that. And the paper that we ultimately wrote, ended up being a reflection of conversations that Rashida and I were having. So the title of the paper is, all right, y'all be easy. The future might just be where fictive religious kinship ends. And it explores religious and fictive kinship and Black Muslim futures by critically analyzing where the two might meet. And so the paper, like Flowers, which is Rashida and I's love letter to Black folks and Blackness, came out of our desire to think about a future where we thrive, where we have everything we need to be healthy, to be safe, to be in community with each other without, the FBI involved, right? Without feeling as though our community is being surveilled or intruded upon, or just kind of in the tenuous position that we exist in now. And so the paper is an exploration of conversations that Rashida and I have, and it kind of turned into this thing. And I'm happy to discuss. I know Hoda has a bunch of super interesting questions to pose, so I'm happy to discuss.
Amazing. Thank you. Yes, I'm really interested. Like, I think that you identify as an Afrofuturist, Camila. And I would be really interested if you do or you don't. And then Sadia also, if you as well do, if you find your work located within this tradition of Black or Afrofuturism. And I think that this is a term that you may not have specifically used, but I think also being able to maybe define what that means, as well as if you do find your work within this tradition, and if so, like, how does this sort of inform the way that you and your work show up in the world?
You want me to answer that?
Yes, that'd be great.
I can start. So, like, concretely, Afrofuturism is like, it can be understood as like a wide-ranging social, political, and artistic movement that imagines a world where African descendant peoples and their cultures play a central role in the creation of that world. More broadly, it's artists and activists and academics who believe and have believed in a better future for Black people and ultimately all people. So it's a body of music, art, film, fashion, political thought, philosophy to that end. One of the writers that we engage in the paper, Lalita Imorisha, has suggested that Black folks in America are already science fiction walking around in real life, right? Like, our very history in this country has been apocalyptic in nature. The world ends and begins anew every day, and we're left in like a liminal space between learning to survive and then envisioning the possibility of a future. So, you know, people always say like, I am my ancestors' wildest dreams, maybe. But I do know that our ancestors had dreams bigger than where they found themselves, and they bent reality to create something more. And so, you know, I know Rashida identifies more with Afrofuturism than I do necessarily, because I don't think I really thought about it. But in engaging the topic and really reading more about how people have thought about it, like, if Black Muslim women aren't the epitome of Afrofuturism, what is? You know, if me being Black and Muslim and walking through the streets of Atlanta in this khimar is not that, what is?
That was a word. That was a word. I'm kind of like, no, Camila, you can keep going. But just to kind of, I mean, her words, I agree. I don't think of myself as an Afrofuturist in the sense that, like, it'd end up in my bio, but I think of myself as an Afrofuturist in the fact that it's like, I'm here, my peoples are here, and we're still going to continue to be here. Even after, you know, whatever is going on, we still here. So I think of it more passively. It's similar to just kind of like breathing. It's like just something you do. It's not always something that you actively think you're pursuing, you know? So, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And I think related to that as well, and sort of like this like legacy that you mentioned, Camila, is like this like history that's been here and that is going to continue to exist. Are there specific, I think, sort of like scholarly traditions or like specific sort of, I guess, writers or poets that you see your work, both of you sort of located within the legacy of and hoping to kind of like push that work forward?
I mean, oh, I'm sorry. Are you talking? I just heard myself echo. I was like, was somebody else talking? That was me.
No, you're good.
I think there's a huge range of artists, right? And like I said, it's not just artists, but it's academics and philosophers. And so I think probably anything that Black people create, right? Like, we are the culture, and we drive every progress of culture as we know it, not just in this country, but abroad. And so there's Octavia Butler, who is like a seminal writer when it comes to Afrofuturism. But then there's also hip hop, right? There is Sun Ra. There is like 70s music with like Parliament and Funkadelic. There's Janelle Monáe. There's a whole range of people who have like explicitly taken the mantle of that term and applied it to what it is they create. And I don't know that I have done that explicitly, except after, engaging in the work and like thinking about it, right? And for me as a Black Muslim woman, like, what does that mean? Well, then I think about the women that I grew up with, right? Who like all this fashion, all this fly that you see, it didn't happen out of anywhere, right? You had Black Muslim women in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s who couldn't go online and buy modest fashion or whatever, right? They had to learn how to sew. They had to figure out how to look, how to be comfortable, how to walk through the streets as themselves, right? They had to figure out what community looks like, what they eat, where they live, how they dress, how they are in relation to each other. And all of that was something they had not necessarily seen before. They had to imagine that and then create it, right? And so I think people think of like the future and they think robots and like flying cars, and all of that is contextualized, right? Like I think if you look at cartoons in like the 60s, the future was like flying cars and robots. And if you look at it now, it's kind of like androids, or people think that it's going to be this like really kind of glossed over, or people have this, oh, we're all going to be like so intermingled that we'll be the same ethnicity and nobody will be able to tell. And I guess purple people will pop up somewhere, right? Because we won't be Black and white. We'll be like all of these different things. And I don't think that's a future I want to be in, right? A future that I am envisioning is not that. But it is a place where I get to be Black, I get to be Muslim, and nobody gets to have a say about that.
Yeah, I would say for me, one of the things about, especially writing poetry is that there's such a long tradition of poetry in Black communities, whether it's spoken word, whether it's slam poetry. We have the Maya Angelou's of the world, the Lucille Cliftons of the world, etc. The poem that I wrote, and the Muezzin Sings the Blues, the one I just did, that actually came to me after reading Sylviane Diouf. And she was essentially speaking about how the Ivan, traveling its way through the transatlantic slave trade, laid the roots and the foundation for blues music. So that's why the title is The Muezzin Sings the Blues. Because when you think about, like Bilal being, a Black man who was enslaved, and then, the generations of Black people who were enslaved that use the Adhan to then create blues music, to then create R&B, to then create et cetera, soul, neo soul, all of these different things. And so I really think that I, as a writer, try to always aspire to read 90% of the time and write 10% of the time. So honestly, it's a situation that, similar to what Camila said, there's so many people who have laid the foundation in their work that, like, we would be here for hours for me to just go through each and every poet, each and every writer, when it's just like, this is something that spans so many generations. It's so intergenerational, and it spans so many decades and so many centuries.
I love that. In essence, culture is all entirely made from Black culture, and it's like everything is rooted in that. So I think that's a very beautiful way of answering that question. And I think also, like, both of your work also sort of touches upon both this idea of like this historic past of our entire creation of everything that we know today sort of being rooted within Black tradition, the current sort of world that we live in, and then a future in which obviously like Black people continue to exist, and we are not foreseeing we're all the same ethnicity at some point in the future, fingers crossed. And I think also to that lens, I think Islam comes in on a very similar way for both of your work, of like this sort of historic past in which we're drawing tradition from a lived sort of practice, as well as a future guideline or blueprint. And so is Islam futurist? Are Muslim futurists? Are those two different answers?
My Islam is liberation theology, right? So Islam, yes. Muslims, maybe. Maybe. Some of them, I don't know. But Islam, yes. I mean, think about it, right? Like Islam is the seal, but it's continuation of the oldest world religions, right? And Prophet Muhammad ﷺ came to remind people of what they had forgotten, and then also to bring a new message that would be the final message. So as a practicing Muslim, as a believer, I can't say there's room for improvement in that. I can say there's room for improvement in the way we practice that and we live out those ideals. But a theology that is rooted in connectivity to people, that is rooted in the people at the bottom of the rung, having their rights restored to them, being cared for by people who have more, right? A theology that is rooted in the ethics of like community responsibility and justice in a way that we hadn't seen before and we very rarely see now. What is more futuristic than that, right? And I think if we really take those tenets to heart, then we will always be, as Muslims, as believers, finding ourselves separated from society in general, because there's always going to be corruption. There's always going to be a Fir'aun that we are fighting against. But as Muslims, our responsibility is to be those people who are future thinking and who are thinking about not just the future as it exists in this life, but the hereafter. And so that all of our actions are in line with that.
I agree. Honestly, Camila can just take all of this over. I don't really have too much to say. I'm just like, I agree. But especially when it comes to Islam as liberation theory, I mean, I come from, my dad is 70 years old, and like I come from him like trying to join the Black Panther Party, and my grandfather being like, boy, if you don't get your butt home, like he really thought he was gonna go from Jersey to LA to Oakland and join the Panthers, and so one of the things that I think is important too is that Islam is it's living, and similar to how Camila said, like Muslims, we got to work on some stuff, but Islam is something that is living, and it's not and these words aren't something that is just kind of like, oh, okay, here's the story of Musa and he split the Red Sea and the end, right? It's similar to Camila said, there's always a Fir'aun, right? There's always kind of those people that exist, those tyrants, those structures, those carceral structures that exist then, that it really takes not too far of a lens to really look into Islam, Hadith, etc., to say, oh, okay, I see how this exists now. And interestingly enough, unfortunately, I think a lot of the dangers that existed back then exist now all at once. And it's kind of like the Qur'an gives it in a way where you can kind of digest it. Like, these people did this danger, this one specific danger, and they were destroyed because they did this one specific danger, and so on and so on and so on. And so we exist in a time now where kind of like it feels like all of these dangers are encompassing and all happening at once. And so, you know, it's important to take that and look back. I mean, especially as a poet, I mean, there's literally a surah in the Quran, Ash-Shu'ara, the poets, right? And the entire surah, as I understand it, is basically like Allah telling Muhammad, like, the people will only listen to you if I say that they listen, if Allah says that they listen, right? So it's like you can do all you want with the message and and oftentimes, especially as poets, we think about things like that. Like, is this art really important? Artists, we think about that. You know, we think about, okay, yeah, I wrote a really good poem, but like, what does this mean? What is this moving? You know? And it's like even something like that is answered in the Qur'an, right? So it's very much a living, breathing religion and way of life.
Yeah, I love that. I also love that like way of understanding poetry that's just so beautiful, of like even like an artist's relationship to their work is like explained in the Quran. That was really beautiful. Thank you. And like very much on that point, actually, last session, last week, we were speaking with Dr. Bilal Ware, and he mentioned how Islam is a living tradition, just as you also mentioned. You know, it's one that's shaped by how we live it. And Ruth Wilson Gilmore also says, in the context of, you know, creating and fighting for abolition, quote, to achieve abolition, we have to only change one thing, which is everything. There isn't any magic. It's just doing it, rehearsing the revolution again and again. So I guess bringing those two sort of in conversation with each other, and building off what we were just talking about, how can some of our living practices of Islam act as a rehearsal for this revolution?
I mean, we have to actually like build authentic community with each other first, right? I feel like people want to skip to, you can't just like skip to revolution. And, you know, so I guess that's my like little pushback against that a little bit. I don't know what a dress rehearsal looks like, but I do know that if you don't have like authentic spaces where people feel like they can be engaged with each other, they are accountable to each other, they have their everybody's well-being is interconnected, right? And I am, you know, my brother's keeper, I am my sister's keeper, and, you know, I want better for you than I even want for myself, right? Those are people that I'm going, you know, that's who I'm going to a revolution party with, right? I can't show up like dressed like I'm going to a revolution, but we can't even agree that we want to be at the same place, right? Because then it really just is a dress rehearsal. Like I'm wearing all the accoutrement, but I'm not really doing anything. And I think that's probably where a lot of Muslim spaces find themselves right now. We're all dressed for revolution, but we're not actually like, we're not about that right now, because we can't even be with each other. And a lot of the times we want to like address ills that we see as existing outside of our communities, and turning a blind eye to things that exist in our spaces. And you have to start there, right? Because you can't, I mean, it's you can fight against stuff that you don't like. And I think that it's, for me, at least in the past couple of years, it's shifted my thinking around abolition, right? Because it's one thing to fight against things that are evil, that are unjust, with people who feel the same way, right? That those things are bad and wrong and have to be destroyed. It's an entirely different experience to build something with people, because that takes more engagement. We can all be mad at the same thing and we can all want to destroy the same thing. But once we've done that, what are we doing, right? It's like we revolutioned and now we're all just standing here looking like, so You can go that way, I'm gonna go that way, right? Peace. And then we just dip out. And maybe that works. But I think it's both tracks are necessary, right? But I think it's more interesting to me to think about will you actually build? And then the basis for building something feels like a stronger bond and a more lasting one. And so if I can say like, well, I know where I want to be in the hereafter. Is that where you want to be? Right? Then maybe we can engage on that basis. Maybe.
And just to thank you, I think also just to maybe clarify the question a little bit, I don't think, at least in the way that I understand this, not revolution in like the literal like sense of a revolution, but like what will it take to actually, like how can we, what are practices within Islam, or like maybe the discipline, as like Ramadan being a very easy example that we're all currently practicing, kind of give us those embodied tools that we need in order to get closer to a moment of liberation, whether it's like, you know, tomorrow's liberation, or whether it's like a grander, you know, state of liberation that we're trying to fight for on a community level. But I do think that you kind of addressed it regardless. But I don't know if you have anything to add.
I do.
Yeah, I mean, it's about a radical change of ethics. And, you know, we come from a religion that states none of you will believe until you want for your sibling what you want for yourself. And period. You know, it's like, let's start there. You know what I'm saying? Like, let's start there. That's all. That should be the common ground.
I don't know, Hoda, like, what are your thoughts on that question then? Let me turn that back around and ask you to answer.
That's not how this game is played.
This very question that you put out there. I'm gonna turn them back around on you and ask you.
No.
What do you how do you answer that?
Well, that's a great. I don't really think of the answers to the questions. I mostly ask questions when I'm like genuinely curious myself of like where, like what are practices that we can draw from Islam. And because I think that when we're thinking about in communities, oftentimes there are things that just kind of like we place on our mantle place and be like, this is Islam. And like, it's nice to read in theory, but then it's a different thing to internalize. Just like you mentioned, like it's, you know, we can talk about what we don't like, but then it's hard to actually like build the world that we want. And how much of Islam can we actually draw from, both in terms of like a lived practice right now to build that world, as well as like providing that blueprint. I mean, I think like the discipline that Islam like forces upon us, of like prayer, you know, like establishing prayer of like, even when we don't feel like it, we have to like drag ourselves out of bed sometimes at like 4 o'clock in the morning, or if we're like have an early bedtime like myself and have to wake up for Isha. Like how can we also like use those as tools that we have to also use in order to like build community, and approach like community building and movement building as well.
So I think with that caveat, then what I will add is that I think it takes a deeper exploration of those things, right? And I will go back to what I said about just wearing the dressing, because it is possible for you to just pray 5 times a day, just fast during Ramadan, just give zakat, go on Hajj if you're able, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. Good, right? And you know, there are hadith to that point, like you could literally just do the basic stuff and you are a believer, you are a Muslim, right? But there are levels to it, right? And are you doing those things like as a rote, just I know I got to do this, so I'm gonna do it every day, which is fine, right? Or are you doing those things with a level of intentionality, right? Where it's not just, I got to knock these out, but I'm going to stop and I'm going to take time and I'm going to like concentrate. And I'm not just going to say ikhlas, you know, both times. I'm going to like stretch myself. I'm going to think about it, right? I'm going to really like aim for just a moment of true connection, you know, to what I'm doing. And I'm going to do that 5 times a day and maybe some extra times a day too, right? And I'm not just going to fast just on Ramadan, even though that's perfectly fine. But I'm going to knock out a couple Mondays and Thursdays, right? A couple of those bright days. I'm going to do a little bit more, and doing that because I want that connection to Allah, right? And I want that connection to myself, and to feel like I am pushing myself even in the things that I'm gonna do, that I'm seeking something different, right? Or I'm seeking a different type of connection. And I think that then feels more like, okay, embodying those types of practices, right? Feels like what you were talking about.
Yeah, I love that. And I agree that there's such a disconnect between like the ritualistic practices of Islam and like the understanding of why that's happening. And unfortunately, I feel like so many Muslim spaces don't get to that place of the why and kind of focus on the dress, as you say, like the external version of that. Like what are like some tools maybe, or like how's your like experience on a personal level like changed throughout that? Like, were there things that you've been thinking about, or how were you able to, I think, start shifting from, or like unearthing some of those deeper like significances of the ritualistic practices that maybe I think we all need support on practicing?
If I could kind of just go ahead and answer that first, I think especially when you come into Islam and you understand Islam through liberation theory, it is very much that. Like, I came from generations who literally knew that in Islam, once you become Muslim, you don't have to change your name, but did so out of liberation, renamed themselves out of liberation, right? Gave themselves names that they felt were noble and had stature and had good meaning, and took away the names that were literally placed upon them based on circumstance, based on horrific circumstance. And so I think it's kind of like one of those things where it's like, listen to Black Muslims, but also too, right? But also too, like, that's very important, because I think the uniqueness of Islam and Blackness and how they intersect is very much that, in that a lot of people from those generations came into Islam because it felt like as my grandfather would say, like a breath of fresh air. Like understanding something that you had in your heart, but you didn't necessarily fully know. And so for me, growing up, it was kind of like a situation where, it wasn't just like, oh, okay, we fast for Ramadan because it's good to do and you can lose a little bit of weight and right? It had a little bit more intention behind it when you think of the fact that my grandfather had to feed 12 children by himself, right? It had a little bit more weight to him when he was able to give his children iftar. These are the type of things that, growing up with Islam as a way to free us, allowed me to kind of grow up with this idea of just like, oh, this isn't something to mess with. This is something serious, right? This is something that's very important. This is something that my ancestors have used to carve out their space of freedom within the world. And I think, honestly, too, we see that in many different cultures, but depending on how open older generations are to that kind of dialogue, it can be kind of hard to see. And I think if we continue to ask and poke and speak to older generations about what is it about this Islam, what is it about this that holds you outside of just like, oh, we may have grown up into this is all I know, etc. What is something that holds this idea of like, going back and getting it and understanding the history as to how you get here today, I think is very important when it comes to understanding Islam as something that is deeply rooted within individuals and within communities.
That was beautiful. I love that. Yeah, and I think that's related somewhat to the next question also that I wanted to ask. that also touches upon both of the work that you all shared of this sort of, I mean, Camila actually names this in her abstract of like religious versus fictitious kinship, sort of like the ways in which our community is divided or racist, let's just say, to be quite bluntly. And so I'm wondering if you can also kind of elaborate on like what are these different relationships look like within the Muslim community that oftentimes I think are some of the biggest challenges to building this world and this discipline that we're talking about, and like those like the significances under these practices. So what is religious versus fictitious kinship, and how are those constructed or challenged?
So fictive kinship, it's like a sociology term. It's basically a methodology where people form connections and communal belonging as a means of like negotiating the world. For Black people, it's like this cruel, dangerous world. And for Black folks building community in America, either as the descendants of enslaved Africans kind of hoisted upon these shores, or as immigrants and refugees who sought out this land when home offered no further shelter, then fictive kin has literally meant survival. It's like the saying, we all we got. It's not just a saying, right? It's facts sometimes that most Black folks in America exist in families that are kind of like a mashup of blood and creation, right? That's just how we exist. So I was not born Muslim. I was raised Muslim. I've been Muslim since I was 14. But my mother, myself, and my brother are the only Muslims in our family. And so when my mom became Muslim, in order to have that connection to other Muslims, we had to find people, right, who could teach us things that we just weren't born knowing, and who could be community. Like, who do you celebrate Ramadan with? Where do you go for Eid prayer, right? Like, how do you figure out how to build community with folks? So those were things that we had to figure out, that we'd have built in. And so you gain family from that, right? Like, everybody has play aunties and uncles and cousins that you know because you grew up with, and those people were essential to your survival. Religious kinship, like I said before, is La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. You say those words, you're Muslim, right? You profess belief, and then it follows that other people who do the same are your kin in Islam. And the Qur'an and Hadith, like, specifically mention our obligations to each other because we're part of this family of believers, that we have responsibilities to each other, things that we owe each other, things that we owe each other individually, and things that we owe each other as community, right? Which is why Believers Bail Out is so essential, because we owe our incarcerated kin relief. We owe them the relief of financial assistance to free themselves. We owe them the fight to continually talk about how the system they are caught up in is unjust. We owe them welcome when they come home. We owe them attention when they're still inside, right? It's an obligation, just like so many other things are. The difference is that we don't always recognize those obligations to each other. And I think for Rashida and I talking about this, when you're thinking about the end of the world, right? The apocalypse, and people starting anew, building again, and who they want to do that with. Who do you want to do that with? Do you want to be in community with people who believe as you believe, but who have a problem with your very existence, right? And I'm, I know that Dr. Ware said it kind of last week, that he was talking about the tensions that exist between people kind of professing to be believers and then having like all this racism, like just backed up, clogging the pores and stuff. So how does that look like, right? Am I to, as a Black Muslim, survive the theoretical end of the world go about rebuilding community, and I end up in the same place in a masjid where, you know, I'm getting followed around just like I was if I'm in a corner store, right? Where I can go into the masjid that I've been going to for 2 decades, and I can be praying, and a woman can come in who I know is new, and I know she's new because I'm intimately familiar with that space, but she can come in and think that I'm new and question me, right? About why I'm there. Or like, oh, look at you being Muslim. Isn't that cute? Right? Like, and this is not the like Islamophobia that Muslims rally against, right? Where it's like white people outside of Muslim community or just other people. This is in your spaces, your intimate religious spaces. Do I want that? I don't want that, right? Like, I don't want that type of kinship. And so we have obligations to each other, but I also think that you are allowed to selfishly guard your deen. And so if me being in spaces where I'm not fighting against non-Muslims to be Muslims, like I'm struggling with Muslims to still be in this space, then I don't want to be in that space, right? I'm good with being like, all right, you got it, y'all good. Like the paper said, y'all be easy. We're going to go ahead and do something else. I'm not saying you're not Muslim. I'm not saying that we are not technically kin. I'm just saying that maybe this is where we part for a minute. And if you get it, like the folks that get it. And if you want to come with us, good. The folks that don't.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's it.
The girls that get it, and the girls that don't.
Don't.
I feel like that would have been a great way to end. But joke, we have one more question. Unless Sadia, there was anything that you wanted to Believers Bail Out just commented, y'all get it. Cool. So the last question, which also I apologize, this is supposed to be a dua and chill. And we haven't really done the chill part, but this is a great conversation and I appreciate you humoring me. The very last question before we sign off and let everybody on the East Coast break their fast is, what will it take? What will it take we're all here, obviously, because we believe that jails should be abolished as like one form of kinship that brings us all together. Also, we should add a cute check-in, I'm being told, at the end for the chillness, which Naha will do. So the second to last question is, what will it take to abolish jails and not just decarcerate, like not just remove people from jails, which we want to happen, but actually abolish those conditions and create the communities that we've talked about in the last session, that we've talked about so much here, that is absolutely necessary to see and taste and feel and experience abolition and liberation. So what type of movement do we need? And then where are we? Like, where are we right now? How far are we?
You want a time frame? I don't know. I hope closer than farther. I think it will take us actually embodying our faith, right? Being who Allah has called us to be. We're the vicegerent of the earth. Us being that. And not being selfish in our responsibilities to each other, right? Like, I feel like, and I know I just said something that kind of contradicted a little bit, but I'm going with it. I feel like if we're just more thoughtful about how we engaged folks, right? And if we were as we expect Allah to be to us, right? So I was listening to a lecture the other day, and the teacher was saying that, when you are making dua, you should have the best of expectations from Allah, right? Like you're making dua sincerely, that you are expecting for your duas to be answered. Maybe not as quickly as you want them or in the form that you want them, but you're expecting good of Allah, because that is the relationship you have with Allah, right? And so I know myself, like, I ask for forgiveness, and I ask for mercy, and I ask for compassion. And I can't ask for those things from Allah, and I'm not willing to be those things in community, right? Because that seems a little bit hypocritical. And so if I want forgiveness, I have to be forgiving. If I want mercy, I have to be merciful. If I want compassion, I have to be compassionate. And if I want, Allah is most just, and I know I'm going to be dealt with justly, I got to deal with people justly. And it isn't easy, right? Which I think is why we keep having these stumbling blocks, and we keep ending up all forms of society and like some form of incarceration, right? It isn't easy. It isn't a quick fix. I don't think it's not a timetable, but I have to believe that it's in the future. I have to believe that it's something that we will see, inshallah. And then even if I don't think that I'm going to see it, I still have to do the work so that it's possible someday.
I am a person who has lived my entire life near some part of the Underground Railroad. And so for me, taking what Camila said and then taking that as a part of my personal history, abolition is not something new, right? And it's also something that within my history has been fought towards. And so I have to always remember that, and I have to always keep that with me. I always say that I'm a baby abolitionist. I'm always just like, I just got here. I just got here. I just started doing the reading. So of course there are people who are much more well equipped to speak about abolition, but I do often think about that. I do often think about the fact that I have always lived at some part like alongside or near the Underground Railroad for a majority of my life, living in Maryland, and I think that is extremely powerful. I think there's an HBCU right now that's currently just sitting on the Underground Railroad. And I think about that when it comes to abolition and this idea that it's like, oh, it doesn't seem like something that is realistic. And kind of circling back and kind of putting this full circle, like abolition is very Afrofuturist. Like it's very much that one of the major driving forces for the future. So yeah.
I love that. I do have to say that it's no longer chill because you use the term circle back, which I think was triggering for a lot of people after work hours. So now it's no longer chill. Thank you for that, Sadia. So everyone can blame her, not me. But to end on a chill note, since Noha has been yelling my name in all caps in the private chat, we can end on an actual chill question, which she suggested, which I love. What has been bringing you pleasure or serenity or peace this Ramadan? I love how you don't have an answer for this one.
No, it's just that I have so much that I was trying to decide what to say. Hold on. Get with
we have
it.
so much time. I mean, as much time as you like.
No, my family. My family. Aww. My mom, my nieces and nephew, like my family. And being able to like be with my family has brought me peace. My friends are not physically where I am, but they hold me down from all over the place. And that is vital and critical And, you know, I have been taking some classes and some workshops that for me have helped to deepen my understanding and engagement with Qur'an. And so it has been, alhamdulillah, like a very beautiful experience. I feel like each Ramadan is different. Each time you read the Quran, it's different, right? Like you read something that you read a dozen times and you find new meaning from it. And so this year is no different. I also got this little book.
It's so pink.
Isn't it cute? And it is like every Ramadan I buy a new notebook, and when I'm reading Quran, I like just take notes for everything, and it's usually full by the end. And so this Ramadan, what I decided to do was instead of just take notes, I was going to make this my dua book, and to just whenever I'm thinking about it during the day, to just stop and write down the things that I want to intentionally ask Allah for. And so those things are bringing me joy now.
I love that. I think what's bringing me joy, yeah, I see, I was like so stuck into what Camila was saying. I should have thought of my answer.
No, it's good. It's good to listen and not just
sitting over here like, yes. But I think one of the things that is kind of bringing me joy is just like having my own agency with how I want to do things for Ramadan. I have 2 little ones, so it's interesting that I'm kind of now in the like mama bear position where I'm like decorating the house and making cookies and all those types of things. And I'm just really enjoying kind of just like setting the foundation for like what Ramadan is for them, because one is almost 3 and one is literally 1. So they're not really picking up right now, but I'm finding a lot of joy in like setting what would be their normal for Ramadan, and you know, just like the lights and the community and the you know, gathering the aunties and uncles for iftar and you know, allowing them to be around. So that's really what's bringing me joy right now.
Wow, the way I legitimately have tears.
That's what's up.
After this, and then take a nap for 3 hours. Also, we have some beautiful people sharing their joys in the chat. So thank you, Samantha, for sharing your joy. That's beautiful, alhamdulillah. Would either of you two, because nose goes, like to close us off with a dua?
I don't.
Not nose goes.
I was what?
That's a yes.
Yes.
I was like, I don't know about y'all, but I ain't doing it.
Like,
It's not me.
wow.
Wow. Expectation. Transparently. Oh, this conversation.
I feel like you kind of have to do it now.
Wow, we have a poet in our midst, and you want a lowly sleep-deprived student to give a dog.
Oh, I love how I'm the one catching strays.
I got it. You are the poet, though. So
I'm the
Thank
person
you.
catching strays.
Okay, I'll be
Okay,
muting myself for this dua, inshallah. Thank you.
Bismillah.
How about we end with Surah Al-Asr? Yeah? Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ.
I mean, thank you both so much for this very super chill conversation about really like lighthearted things. I really appreciate you all, and thank you everybody who is tuning in for this whole time. We really appreciate you. I'm super grateful. We've also have almost reached, or maybe at this point have surpassed, our first 100K on the fundraiser. So alhamdulillah, this is wild. We're really excited. And so far we've bailed over bailed out over 100 believers, which is, alhamdulillah, incredible and only possible with everybody in this Zoom background, not Zoom, StreamYard thing, as well as everyone, like viewers like you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I need a nap.
Like more of this PBS style programming, please see the stream below and donate.
Absolutely, and tell your friends. And also, if you have people in your communities or networks who are currently incarcerated and actually need bail, also please reach out. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to connect. So thank you all so much, and Ramadan Mubarak. Have a lovely rest of your Eid.
Assalamu alaikum.
There you go.
Shut up.